thumbs up, or Crystal, if you can confirm.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, again, guys, my name is Chandler Thomason. I'm a solutions director at ThreeCloud, really focusing on the managed services piece. I've also brought three really great individuals along with me. Two of them are going to be presenting later. That's Chris Bauer and Manny Sheth. Chris is our operations director for managed services, and Manny is our lead service delivery manager. So both of these folks are going to be doing demos, really diving into cost management, Azure spend, kind of how to do spend type optimization. And then we've also got Mark Nelson on here, who is our VP of managed services. So really just a great panel here that knows the ins and outs of both kind of Azure managed services, but also cost optimization and financial operations. So again, would love to keep this pretty interactive and conversational. So if anybody has any questions during the presentation, feel free to shoot them over. But otherwise, we'll just dive right in. Cool. So just a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. So the first thing we want to do is really talk about what is financial operations in Azure. If you Google financial operations, about a million different things come up, and you really have to specifically put in Azure to really start diving into what it means in Azure. Financial operations really revolves around kind of the cost optimization, and hey, we're all probably spending too much in Azure, and I'm guessing everybody on the phone wants to stop spending so much in Azure. And this is really where the financial operations revolves around. We talk about kind of the three key pillars, the keys to success, the things that we all need to do in order to maximize that cost optimization. Then we're going to dive into a couple demos, walking you through, hey, how can I get started? And then also a demo on what we call 3CMP. It's one of our internal tools to help do cost management and reporting. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about licensing in Azure. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about ThreeCloud can help. Ways that we help our clients do things like financial operations. So let's just kind of get the high level overview out of the way and kind of what is financial operations in Azure. Sometimes called FinOps, but it's really the act of implementing initial and ongoing processes. So financial operations, it really takes a concerted first step to implement, but it's also an ongoing piece. You have to continually run these processes. You have to continually run these tools because things can get out of control very, very quickly. The idea behind these processes, tools, and techniques is to increase the overall value your organization receives from Azure. It's very specific that I put value there because when we talk about spending in Azure, it's possible that you're spending more in Azure, but you're getting significantly more value. Maybe you, as part of your financial operations, you actually increased the size of a virtual machine or scaled out more virtual machines. And that gave you better customer performance. So when your customers were logging in, they started running 3 times faster. You likely are getting more value out of that, regardless of if it's costing you more. So financial operations doesn't always have to mean spend reduction. But of course, it also, the kind of the key reason that everyone jumps at is we want to reduce overspending. So it's not overspending if you're getting the proper amount of value out of Azure, but we obviously want to reduce as much as we can. Microsoft's put some really great things in place on how to reduce that. So really, the talking from Gartner's perspective, it's kind of some shocking statistics. Companies that are unaware of mistakes made in their cloud adoption will overspend. We kind of see this all over the place, and it's really almost half of the organizations that do kind of these shifting workloads to clouds, like probably a lot of you are doing, they're going to overspend by up to 70% during the first 18 months. It's really, really simple for things to get out of control in Azure. And that's really leaning toward the idea that Azure spend is very, very complex. Financial operations is much, much easier said than done. It's very simple to say, oh, well, I'll just analyze, out of cost management. I'll take a look at Azure Advisor. I'll, buy some reserved instances, and great, I'm not overspending anymore. It's kind of the fact of the matter that by default, moving into the cloud, you're likely not going to capture every piece of optimization that you have. And so first of all, when you look at kind of how complex spend is, there's a million questions you can ask. There's a million different aspects of what can go right and what can go wrong. What does application 1 cost to host? Is business unit 1 forecasting the actual proper number that they're going to spend, or based on demand, is it going to shuffle up and down? So there's all these variables that can change, and your environment is also evolving. So you're constantly rolling out new applications, you're constantly bringing in new employees or losing employees, or you're bringing in new applications or whatever it may be. And all of these variables in point 1 and 2 really come down to the third one, which is you actually have to understand and know Azure to truly optimize your spend. So you're going to need knowledge of your environment and Azure technology. I'm sure all of you are experts in your own environment, but are you experts in the Azure technology? And are you experts in Azure licensing? And all of these different tools, cost management, for example, evolves all the time. Are you familiar with these to be able to do a proper financial operations implementation? So really just talking about the 3 key pillars to success. We like to try to keep this as simple as possible. There's kind of 3 steps, and all of these have to be executed. It's not necessarily in a particular order. Reporting obviously is the logical one to do first, but all of these things need to be implemented simultaneously to really make a sticky financial operations plan. And I say sticky, meaning that you want your financial operations to stick around and keep going. So really looking at these pillars of reporting and optimization and governance, we can just dive right into the first of reporting. Probably kind of the simplest because it's the most tangible, but the first thing before you ever start reporting, and I apologize for just a second. A few special guests along with Mark Maney and Chris on the line as well. Sorry about that, guys. So really talking about the first pillar of reporting, the most important piece before you ever start reporting is actually knowing the current state of your organization. That's kind of what reporting is built out to do, is to figure out that current state. But it's also important to know the full needs of your organization. You can spit out the most beautiful reports ever on your organization, but if you don't know what your organization actually needs, then we're not going to find much success in analyzing those reports. So it's really important to understand what direction are we moving? What is the ultimate goal here? And there's really 2 ways to effectively report in Azure. The first is Azure Cost Management. This is native to Azure. It's available to everyone. It's a great place to start. There's things you can do in Azure Cost Management, like creating budgets and spend alerts, and there's some built-in reporting capabilities. Like I said, it's a great place to start, but it does require expertise to use effectively. There's not necessarily these out-of-the-box or canned reporting tools that a simple third-party tool or simple UI that a third-party tool may have. So it may take you some time to really dive into cost management and really figure out to see the values that you need. And when it does spit it out, it's not necessarily in the most digestible format. And so when we look at Azure Cost Management, it's never a Azure Cost Management versus third-party tooling. It is usually a Azure Cost Management plus third-party tooling. There's a ton of great tools out there that really sit on top of cost management, and it's going to simplify those reporting and management capabilities. So when we talk about simplified UIs or cleaner reports, more digestible reports, this is something that third-party tooling is going to be able to sit on top of Azure Cost Management to apply. Anyone can go out and kind of sign up for these third-party tools. There's a ton of great links out there for kind of analyzing these and what's best. Another great way to do get access to third-party tooling is through managed service providers. Obviously, that's gonna a little bit of a shameless plug, but any of you that have existing managed service providers, definitely go pursue that option and say, hey, do you guys use specialized tooling that we can use internal or to work with you in order to get kind of better views into our environment? And finally, it's just important to note that you need to do more than just report on it. You have to have a full analysis of the requirements, and most importantly, you have to have a full discovery of the requirements. It's possible to spit out 10 reports and none of them have kind of the proper requirements that you actually need. So it's really important to really dive in of are we covering all the aspects of what we need to report on in the first place? Here's just a quick example of kind of what spend reporting may look like for an organization. A great way to look at this is kind of, we don't know what we don't know, can we become aware of what we don't know? And something like this is really just a great breakdown of, hey, based on these high level numbers, am I able to see the changes in something? So VM spend is down by 16%. Why is that? Let's think about what we've done as an organization lately and think about why that may have happened. Are we shifting to a more PaaS-based infrastructure, which is reducing our VM spend? And that's why our storage spend is up. That's kind of the conclusion that I would make from this graph. If you make that conclusion and you say, wait a second, we didn't do that in our organization, maybe it's time to kind of look into something and figure out, okay, well, why is this happening? Can we reduce this even more? Or storage spend is going up. Is there a way to dive into that farther and optimize that farther? And then really talking about probably the key pillar, which is optimization. You identify your demands, you report on the demands, you have this great analysis of the environment. Now you need to find the best solution. So there's multiple ways to optimize, but there's kind of usually typically a best way to optimize. We want to find the best solution for the needs that you have as an organization. And there's really three primary ways that optimization can happen. The first is consolidation. You look at the idea of, can multiple resources be combined into a single larger one? This is really a great, as Azure becomes more powerful, as technology becomes more powerful, can we take 5 machines and just make one really beefy one to serve the same purpose? And now we're only paying for one machine, which is probably more expensive, but we're saving on the licensing costs of 5 different machines. And so there's likely some savings there. And then being able to use Azure Hybrid benefit. Are you licensing on-prem servers and Azure servers? Can we double dip on this licensing cost? Microsoft has some great benefits around that. Talking about reduction, maybe a machine is running at 10% CPU all day, and it's like, why do we have that machine at such a high level? Can we reduce the size of that machine? Can we reduce the power behind that machine? And obviously save costs on that. Is there something we can do regarding turning resources off during nighttime or non-peak hours? Is it seasonal? Maybe some of you are in the retail business of Christmas comes around and all of a sudden we need to dim resources or spike resources during the holiday seasons. And then things like zombie and orphan resources. And the important thing to highlight about stuff like zombie and unused resources is we're going to talk about governance on the next slide, but it's really making sure that you keep things during an ongoing optimization. It's important that you keep things, I always call it pristine. So it's very easy for resources to kind of, or for your employees to spin up resources and kind of forget about them. It really only takes one person in a hurry to forget to properly document something or to properly turn something off. And a lot of times through our optimization exercises, we find things like these, and it happens. It definitely happens to everybody, but it's important to try to keep track of these things and put things in place to be able to locate these as soon as possible and not 6 months later. And then finally, Microsoft obviously provides some great options regarding investment into Azure. Reserved instances, for those who aren't familiar, is essentially pre-purchasing kind of a VM SKU or a resource, for example, on a 1 year or a 3 year. This allows you to kind of reserve the instance, for lack of a better term, and you're going to pay significantly less. The savings are huge on these because you're telling Microsoft, hey, we are going to specifically use this resource, and therefore Microsoft's able to give you kind of a non-pay-as-you-go rate on that front. Oops, sorry about that. And then also from a PaaS versus IaaS opportunity. You need to find out what's right for your organization. PaaS versus IaaS, it's not a clear answer. It can be either one. So definitely work with your organization, work with your vendor, work with your experts, work with your architects to find out what works better for you. But typically moving to PaaS is a little cheaper in the long run because you're not paying for things like licensing. But it really depends on what your organization can support. And then finally, it's worth mentioning that Azure Advisor is a great tool native to Azure. It's a very simple to use. You kind of open it up and Azure Advisor will spit out some recommendations on what's available to you, things like RIs and right sizing. The most important thing to note here is that Advisor is an algorithmic approach. It's an AI, obviously. This is not a person who knows your business and knows your environment. When you look at Azure Advisor, the most important thing to do is use those as clues. You don't want to just take all of those as gospel and immediately click through and be like, oh, I should do XYZ because Azure Advisor told me to. We highly, highly recommend using Azure Advisor. We do in our spend optimizations, but we use these as clues. So use it as a starting point and something to investigate rather than kind of the all-in solution. And just to give you a quick idea of kind of what we're able to do with optimization, or what you can do with optimization, Microsoft all the time releases new versions of VM SKUs. For example, I believe that the F4 just came out pretty recently. So as you know, new versions come out, a lot of times that these SKUs are more powerful, or there's more technology behind it. And that's able to kind of right size a lot of your environment, or reduce some of your environment, or optimize some of your environment. And so something like this is a great breakdown of what it can do. So when you look at, hey, we can upgrade these SKUs, but we can also begin prepaying these SKUs. And you can kind of see the difference in what this can make, in that literally just buying 1-year reservation, saying, hey, I'm going to be using these machines for a year. I am very, very confident in that fact. You're able to save 50% just right off the bat right there. So this is really the power of something like reserved instances, or the power of being aware that new SKUs are coming out, or that you can use reserved instances. I know Manny and Chris will talk about it a little later, but there's definitely a breakpoint with 1-year reserved instances. I'm not sure the number, but I'm sure one of them will mention it. But there's kind of an idea of, even if you're going to use the reserved instance not the full year, there definitely is a breakpoint to be able to optimize there as well. And then finally, moving into kind of the governance piece, Microsoft has a really neat, it's called the Cloud Adoption Framework. So a lot of you have heard of it, but if you haven't, it's essentially kind of Microsoft's guidelines on how do we move into Azure successfully. It's got some really great resources, but two of the pieces of the Cloud Adoption Framework revolve around cost management and resource consistency. And these are really the most important pieces of the Cloud Adoption Framework from a financial operations perspective. These are kind of the two things that need to be adopted properly in order to implement FinOps. And so when we talk about kind of the governance pieces, yes, there are things like, you know, provisioning and scaling. Are we deploying resources the same as the last? And there's things like resilience and posture. These are all important governance frameworks. But what we really need to be able to do is establish a very, very clear governance framework around cost itself. So a lot of you may have governance frameworks around, you know, provisioning resources, or this is how we do our help desk. This is how a user ticket is submitted. This is how we do disaster recovery. Those are all incredibly important things. You need to implement those type of clear and tangible metrics on cost itself. So when we spin up a new resource, do we have a process to identify how big that resource should be? How should that resource be a reserved instance? Do we know, after someone spins up a resource, do we know if they are leaving it on? Do we have a proper tag to ensure that it is supposed to be on? Do we have a tagging system in general to know what resources belong to which part of the business? Chargebacks are becoming a really, really big thing in the industry right now, of being able to specifically charge business units for what they're utilizing out of your Azure. Implementing governance around this is key to really that ongoing piece of financial operations. If you don't have those governance pieces in place, things can just spin out of control really, really quickly. So I'll take a breath there, kind of pause, make sure there's no questions, but also really hand it over to Manny Sheth, who again is our lead service delivery manager. He's going to kind of walk you through and show what cost management and Azure Advisor looks like in a sandbox environment. So I'm happy to pass it over to him here and let him take over.
Thanks, Shanna. I think we just need to be the organizer, right? And then I can start sharing.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so just want to confirm everybody can see that, or Chandler, you can confirm.
Yep, good to go.
Okay, great. So what we've been talking about here is all the different ways you can, take advantage of sort of native cost management tools or third-party tools. So the first bit here is, well, what's in Azure already? And one of the things we kept referring to is something called Azure Cost Management. So for those of you who have an access to your Azure portal, if you look for the sort of cost management blade in your Azure portal and pull up this interface, you'll usually get a landing page. So the cost management is really this entire module And then there's different sort of blades within this cost management interface that will help you take a little bit more of a financial perspective on your Azure, right? So you can do things that are a little bit more tactical, like look at your invoices, depending on how you receive your Azure. So if you are being resold by a partner, then some of these options may be a little different. For example, if you're a CSP customer, you may not have direct access to your invoices that would be posting here. But if you're purchasing from Microsoft, either pay as you go or with any kind of agreement, then oftentimes you'll be able to see your invoices, things like that. There's other aspects of cost management, again, that you're more than welcome to explore. But the focus today for us is really, well, what can you do from a cost reporting perspective, just natively out of Azure, right? And so one of the first things that I've kind of clicked into is this cost analysis. So again, you may have to kind of click through a couple of levels of the interface to kind of get to this cost analysis blade. But when you do, you generally get into a landing page that looks like this. And what we have found is that this is very powerful. It has a lot of information ready to kind of view your Azure spend in multiple different perspectives, however you're interested in looking at it. Whether it may be, by environment, by subscription, if you use application tagging, by region, however you like to look at it, this allows you to do that. But as Chandler kind of mentioned earlier, you kind of have to know this interface. You have to know where to click and kind of know where to go. There isn't like a drop down of just sort of pre-canned reports that you can kind of pick and choose and that are very intuitive, that you can just kind of say, yep, this is a real common search that I'd like to perform. So let me click this one button and get there. You're not going to have that capability, but nevertheless, it's still a very powerful tool. And what I'd like to demonstrate today are just, again, some really quick and easy ways you can kind of get some insight on your spend. So this is just a demonstration Azure environment. And again, just looking at this entire page, there's a lot of information here, right? So right out of the gate, you can see a little bit of a graph here in the middle. This graph is very dynamic, allows you to kind of manipulate various aspects to view what you're interested in. So the first thing I would say is kind of like a date range, right? So you have all these different options to say, I want to look at it by billing period or, more kind of date ranges, right? So, this month to date, this quarter, last 3 months, and things like that. There are a lot of filter options as well. So in terms of the filters, I'll kind of dive into this in just a minute here. But you'll have options for all the different kind of fields that Azure's tracking for your consumption and for your meter. You'll be able to kind of filter and sort and kind of group, your spend to kind of, again, just get a little bit more insight in terms of, all right, I've got, a $10,000 a month bill, or I've got a $50,000 a month bill, or I've got a $200,000 a month bill. Well, where's that spend actually going, right? What am I paying for? So really, you'll kind of get into some granularity there that I'll show you in just a moment, right? Then right out of the gate, kind of at the top left, you have sort of your actual cost and your forecasted view. So again, naturally, because Azure will be able to use some predictive algorithms that look at your historical spend, they'll be able to start giving you this kind of light shaded area that tells you, all right, well, here's where you are sort of month to date. But we expect towards the end of the month, just based on the nature of the meters that have been running so far, you're going to kind of be at this dollar amount at the end of the month. So again, right out of the gate, you've got some forecasting capability. Very basic, but forecasting nonetheless, right? And then you also have an option to set a budget. So let's say yours a little bit more volatile. Let's say you're just starting to kind of get more familiar with this and you have a number that you need to stay under, right? You could establish a budget and it'll just kind of give you a nice dark red line right at the top by kind of creating this budget. And then what you could do in pairing with this budget, and I'll show you this interface as well, is this cost alert. So you can start kind of getting an email, if you'd like, that says, hey, my spend is getting pretty close, either as a percentage or a dollar amount in total or towards that budget. So, hey, when I've hit 80% of my budget, and I'm getting that email on the 9th of a month, you kind of know you're going to go over budget, right? So it's a nice little indicator of where you're trending and where you're headed sort of before you get that surprise invoice at the end of the month, right? So I think those are some of the cool features kind of up there. And then really what I like to play with on the top right of this chart are these three kind of drop downs. So you have a group by option, which again, I'll show you why that's important here in just a moment. You have the granularity level. So right now we're in accumulated, so it kind of shows you, your growth but they have daily and monthly options that I also like to look at. And then you have option side that kind of go this area graph or sort of a column stack or table. So very, very neat. So I'm going to kind of dive into just, a sample scenario here next. But before doing that, just the one more part of the interface at the bottom are, again, some built-in reporting, right? So you do have these sort of pie charts that, again, are defaulting to some common types of questions, customers of Azure may have. Oftentimes, you'll kind of look at the service name as a breakdown. So this is a nice little pie chart that's showing you for this date range, what have I spent month to date by these service levels, kind of in a pie view. Again, you can hover over it, you can see the dollars, and you can click into it. Or you can change any of these as well into one of the other options. But they give you 3, again, automatically at the bottom that load every time you kind of load the page. So you'll have a location drop down, which regions are you in? If you want to look at research groups, that's another option. Or, again, let's say I wanted to just change this to sort of subscription name or something like that, or, maybe meter category. That's very equivalent to service name, but subcategory sometimes kind of goes into a slightly more detailed level. So now the pie chart's only going to be able to fit so many, right? So you're going to kind of get grouped into other towards the end. But again, it gives you a little bit of insight in terms of what did I actually pay for? So this $100 are VMs of the DV2, DSV2 family. And so that's what I paid for up until this point, is those VMs and that size running, right? So that's kind of, again, just as I've opened the page, this is what this lands to, right? But now let's go a little deeper, right? Let's say I'm kind of a little bit more interested in the history. So one of the things I always like to do, and if you kind of think about the slide that Chandler had showed just a few moments ago about a trend, right? How do I look at my spend and how has it changed month over month? Well, one of the things I like to do is I always like to go for like sort of the last 3 months. So again, it's dynamic. You don't have to, you can pick custom dates, but the dynamic 3 months kind of automatically selects July through September. And so now you see your total cost. Again, forecast is unavailable because we've picked an end date, right? So you're looking at actuals at this point and not forecast. But I'll choose that. And then one of the things I like to do is I kind of go right to left. So from an area perspective, I actually like to see this more in a stacked column. And then I like to go and choose sort of monthly as my interval. So I'll let this load for a moment. And again, now we're already starting to kind of shape this graph into that slide that Chandler had showed to show kind of a 90-day trend, right? So this is helpful. In July, I was about 12,000, almost 300. Then I went to 9,000, and I've taken a decent dip, and I'm all the way down to 4,000 now. Well, why is that the case, right? What has kind of changed, or what meters have kind of had the biggest impact? So one of the things I like to do is, again, use the group by. So I like meter category or sort of service name. And for those of you on the call who look at invoices, you'll see that the names that are with service name or meter category are most aligned with what you're being charged in terms of like the meter line item in your invoice. So these are the things that will translate the most, right? Virtual machine fees, storage fees, if you're paying for purview, firewall, security center, and so on. So now I have, this sort of grouped graph, and I can actually hover over any one of these items and see the dollar amount. And again, with the kind of color coding here, so I can actually see the trend. So I've changed from 2,800 in VMs, only took a little bit of a dip in August, but then, clearly a significant amount of VMs have been, shut down and decommissioned most likely because that spend has taken a significant dip, right? So this is, again, just one quick way that I really like to get sort of a 90-day trend view to understand, month over month, sort of what has changed, right? And then let's say, you are interested specifically in, okay, well, what VMs stayed up, what VMs kind of went down, because I'm seeing a huge significance. Well, one of the things we can do is, we could just start filtering out some things to kind of help blow up the graph a little bit. So each one of these little keys you can unclick to sort of filter out. That's a little bit of a manual exercise. You get closer to what you're looking for, but this is where, again, I would switch over to start using filters. So for example, I know virtual machine service name is what I'm interested in. So what if I went and just filtered for only my virtual machine sort of type of cost? So if I make my filter service name, and then it populates all the different service names, I can go ahead and scroll down and find virtual machine and hit apply. And now the graph will refresh to kind of show me again just that virtual machine type fee month over month for that date range. Now let me try to get a sense of, well, what VMs were these, right? So there's a couple of different things I can do here. You do have resource groups, but the other thing you have here are types of VMs. So you can say, coming back to that meter subcategory, for example, this will kind of give you a breakdown of sizes. So you kind of get a sense of, all right, well, which VMs were shut down. Clearly, the D series took a significant dip. In this case, all of them did, right? So this is what this graph is telling me. But again, if I wanted to dig into specific sizes, this is what will tell me that. The other option is, well, I don't really know the size off the top of my head. Depending on who's looking at the graph, the size doesn't really tell me anything. What's the name of the VM itself? Well, we can do that here too. So I can go down to the resource level and choose to actually just show me the resource names, again, in the same exact filters, same exact date range. So just let this load here for a moment. Now, again, because I'm choosing individual resource names, it may take a little longer to load, but now you have that. So we have these different server names, and that's kind of what was being built here. So again, a quick and sort of dirty view of the overall ways you can use some Azure cost management, but very robust, very detail oriented, but you kind of have to build it, right? It's a little bit of a sandbox. You have to know what filters are out there, how to manipulate this interface, and how to take advantage of the native tool. But this is a part of your Azure subscription. Depending on your role level, you may have to work with your system administrator to make sure that you have appropriate role to be able to view this information. That's the only kind of limitation, right? But that's controlled by your organization. So as long as you're purchasing Azure, you should be able to access this tool and be able to view this very kind of native reporting interface. The other thing I was going to show very briefly, was kind of cost alerts, right? So one of the things you could do in here is actually create an alert that interests you. So you want to name the alert itself, but then you can choose kind of your period, monthly budget if you've got, or a quarterly budget you have, a number you're trying to avoid hitting. You can do that. You can choose sort of the date of which you want this alert to be kind of active, what your scope is. So if you want to limit it to a particular subscription, you can do that. You can apply filters. So just like we were looking at before, hey, I want to know when my VM fees hit $300 a month, where I could just limit this to only VM fees. And then I could choose either sort of a dollar amount and kind of click through this sort of wizard to actually establish your alert. This alert will then allow you to kind of choose, do you want to deliver to an email address or a distribution list and so on. So the budget alerts are really nice. And then, kind of the forecasting features as well. So you can choose, there's one other aspect of sort of forecasting and actual cost. There is a little toggle here. So for those of you in Azure kind of using reservations, you may realize that you may pay for a monthly reservation on a particular day every single month. So it's kind of hard. When you see the growth, it makes sense. But when you're trying to look at your average month or a current month, it may seem a little low or high, depending on how many reserve instances you've purchased. So you can kind of toggle over to an amortized cost. And so this amortized cost just tries to help predict and level out, okay, based on what hits on certain days. Let me kind of stretch out what your total spend would be by spreading that reservation purchase across your entire month, right? Just to kind of average out the total fees. So a lot of information there. Again, a lot of uses of the different blades inside of sort of native cost management. The other aspect, or other great resource inside of Azure that Chandler was referring to just a minute ago was Azure Advisor. So what I've got here is a Azure Advisor landing page. So again, you just kind of search for the Advisor app inside of your Azure portal, And you have quite a number of areas that you can kind of dig into from a security perspective, a performance perspective, operational excellence. Again, we're focused on FinOps today, or cost management. So when I click into the cost management, you get some great recommendations that are just, again, coming right outside of native Azure. Now, the one thing we'll say is that, most of these are very algorithmic, they have calculations. So some of them you'll have to do some validation on, right? Just because it's in here doesn't necessarily mean it's a good purchase for your organization. There may be some aspects of your business case, your strategy in Azure or particular application with IaaS may influence exactly whether you should purchase this or not. This is where we say leverage expertise. If you're lucky, you have that expertise internally, great. If a strategic partner is that expert, or Microsoft, that's good as well. But always leverage some sort of expertise to help make these decisions, because it's always not black and white. For example, if it says buy virtual machine reserve instances, great. So I've clicked in here. Now it's telling me that I have about 3 instances of DS2 V2s in the South region. It's telling me my potential savings, which this isn't a significant amount. This is an annual figure, so about $2,000 over a year is not a lot of dollars. But regardless, it is out here as a recommendation, as a calculated approach. But what you can see here is it tells you right out of the gate, the reason it's telling you to buy these reserve instances, that it looks at kind of the last 30 days of usage. Again, this can vary, right? You may have just spun up a server to test something, right? And you're running it for maybe 1 month or 2 months, and then you're going to decommission it. Well, if that's the case, it wouldn't make sense to purchase a 3-year reserve instance for that, or even a 1-year reserve instance for that. So your actual strategy has to be combined with these recommendations and discussed and assessed, right, to determine whether these recommendations make sense. But it's always a great clue, is what we always like to say, is that it tells you to go investigate something. So another big one here, right, for us is in this environment is for data warehouse. Now, you can purchase all types of reserve instances. There's reserve instances for virtual machines, reserve instances for database, storage, and others. So in this case, because we may have formerly SQL Data Warehouse, it's now called Azure Synapse Analytics, since we have an instance of that running and the amount of consumption that's happening there, it is making this recommendation, so that's great. But again, we may have a strategy that says, well, we've spun something up. Again, this is our sandbox. We've spun something up for, let's say, 30 or 60 days. If it's going to get torn down, it may not make sense to make a reservation for 1 year or 3 years, right? So this is where, again, Azure Advisor is a great resource, provides you a lot of clues to investigate, but the investigation is necessary nonetheless. So a combination of native tooling and third-party tooling, or as well as a managed service provider or other partner of any kind, is really the right formula. And so I think what we're going to move on to here next, unless there's any questions related to just native Azure, is how do we leverage third-party tooling to help our efforts here on top of native Azure?
Yep.
So,
thanks, Manny. Yeah, I will go ahead and hand it over to Chris Bauer here. Thanks, Manny, for presenting that, guys. Feel free to drop any questions. Manny's definitely sticking around in the chat here, but I'm sure he'll happy to answer any questions toward the end here. So with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Chandler. All right, let me share out my screen.
Good to go?
Sorry.
Stop.
I apologize. This isn't loading. Live demos. There we go. You guys can see the homepage here.
Yep, good to go.
All right, so this is our custom cloud management platform. We call it 3CMP. This is the homepage for it. So again, this is just a sandbox environment that we have, and this is the landing page. So last month's expense, current month, and then this untagged cost is going to be kind of a theme here that we'll go through in this tool. The reason why we want to call that out right in the beginning of the homepage is because your reporting is only as good as how well your environment is tagged. So right here we can see that $400 out of the $2,200 we have in here is untagged, and we'll drill down into that a little bit more after this. But right here, Azure cost by service over time. If you want to say, all right, I want to see this in maybe a stack bar. Okay, you can look at that. It's over daily cost. All right, I want to deep dive this, and I want to do a split view. I want to look at, the compute. I'll just say, all right, what services do I want here? I want compute, and I want to go from, last month, apply that filter to current month, and I want services compute. So this will load, and just you can look at this over time. And at any point in here too, these are all basically widgets. So if you're looking here to say, okay, I want to add this to a cart, I want to put this into a report that I want to save later, this is where you can do that. So anywhere where you see this cart button, you can basically add that to a cart. So here's just a different view of this. And then down to untagged cost by distribution. So this again, where is the stuff that is untagged? You can deep dive this, click into recovery services. We can see, all right, this is untagged. And same thing, you can always do split view and look at any of this side by side if you want, or all of these views are customizable. I'll go through a few different views as we go through this, but if you want legacy reporting, you want it in Excel, you want that archived, you can certainly do that. But we really encourage people, let's figure out some views that you want. Let's work with the filters here, and then you can just keep changing those and just have a living, breathing view that we think is a lot more effective. So I'll go down into this in a little more detail. So if you want to go to, we were looking at compute before that. This basically just goes top down. So cost center overview, subscription, resource group. If you did have reserved instances, as Chandler and Manny were talking about before, that's where those would be. We can go down into compute. Same thing as we're going to before, just basically each service category that this is coming to. A couple that I do want to highlight, data transfer. I think sometimes this can be a bit of a black hole when you're trying to figure out, all right, well, where did that egress cost come from? Where's my georeplication data transfer coming from? All this is called out in a separate blade here. And so you can really find out, were we transferring data, we're doing a migration, why did this spike up? You can look at this right here in this blade. The other one that I think is interesting to put in its own category is we call it operational service. So these are these shared services where, again, it's hard to pinpoint where is this coming from. But for this, it would be log analytics. If you had things like Sentinel, if you had the paid Azure Defender, this would all show up here. And again, that's a kind of shared services that you're looking at. And so you can call this out right here. You can say, all right, well, I want to put this into a cart. So I'll switch to a different view. This was basically a 6-month view. So we were talking about what was just that first month that we were looking at. All right, well, let's look at more of a 6-month view over time. And Manny was showing that, or I believe Chandler, we were showing, all right, what does the trend look like over those last 6 months? What was happening? Can we see what type of service it was that was having a problem here? You can see our cost. Again, this is our sandbox environment. You can look at this right here. Stack bar here. You can see that this is our demo environment. We were demoing some pretty expensive hardware. And here in this, you can see the trend just go down from here. And again, we'll look at tag distribution here. All right, what is the, what tags do we want to be looking at? And this will go into, it's going to go down right here into our tag configuration. So you can see this is in my cart, because I already said, all right, I want to look at that later. But we were saying, okay, well, what are all these untagged resources? Something that's pretty unique about this tool is you can say, all right, I want to know, I have a tagging strategy that I'm using right now, and I need to know where is, I just put this for purpose of this demo here, I can edit this. I want to know if everyone is using the owner tag ThreeCloud on here. So, okay, we'll go into resource tagging. This goes by each service category like this. So I can come into virtual machines here. You can see, all right, well, here's a whole bunch of resources here that don't have that owner tag. I come into here, this is filtered. All right, this is right here. 2 of these have the owner tag. This last one doesn't. This API does, we start off with, it just has read access, but we can give it tag contributor access. So we can say, all right, I want to update this. We can say owner ThreeCloud. Refresh. This just tagged my Azure environment. This is not in this tool. I went and actually tagged the Azure environment here. Now I'm up to date. So basically you can do this with every single meter category. Go into network or whatever it is. So that pretty much sums up the demo for this. And I think I'll take it back over to Gemma.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. All right, let me just get reset up here real quick. And if you can just confirm you see my screen here.
We can see it, Chandler. Thanks.
Cool. So yeah, again, guys, there's a question panel kind of using the GoToWebinar software. There's a drop-down menu for questions if you guys wanted to submit anything for Chris and Manny. Those guys are definitely some encyclopedias of knowledge when it comes to this kind of stuff. So definitely utilize them if you have any questions kind of specific to your organization. But really diving back into the presentation, just a couple slides more to go, but we really wanted to talk about subscription types in Azure. It's kind of one of the most important pieces of Azure. It's kind of the foundation of how you sort your Azure journey in a sense. And there's really 3 primary types. The first is pay-as-you-go. The second is CSP or cloud solution provider. And the third is kind of the EA or it's sometimes known as MCA agreement, so Microsoft Customer Agreement. The pay-as-you-go model is kind of the default. It's really the, hey, we're sticking a credit card on this Azure subscription, and as we continue to spend, just keep adding it to that credit card. You're kind of left on your own for support, or you can purchase support separately. It's really just kind of usually typically reserved for smaller organizations. The 2 really key ones as you continue to grow in your Azure journey is either CSP or the EA. With CSP, a partner such as ThreeCloud owns 100% of your licensing. So as you need a license, you request it from us, we spin it all up. We own the billing relationship. And most importantly, partners are the singular point of contact, meaning if you have an issue, it typically escalates through the partner first, and it's typically supported by that partner first. A lot of CSP partners, including us, provide value add services. So if we own your subscription and we own your Azure journey, we sit on top of that subscription management and we're able to provide additional services. One of those, for example, is access to that 3CMP tool that Chris just covered, or it's helping you with that spend optimization through that. So a lot of different partners out there, a lot of different services you can get added on. If you're currently on a CSP, I would definitely encourage you to talk to your partner about that. Hey, do I get anything for being a part of your CSP in the first place? The second is typically for larger accounts, typically when Microsoft comes in and directly engages you, and that's the enterprise agreement model. So your contract is directly with Microsoft. The EA can be resold sometimes, but that contract itself is with Microsoft. And Microsoft is really going to be your primary contact. You don't really go through a partner at that stage. You go through Microsoft. If you have any problems with your billing or your technical issues, it really goes through Microsoft. EAs typically come packaged with some sort of Premier Unified Support Agreement. You can get free support through Azure. You click that little question mark up there and submit it, and you'll go through kind of that standard ticketing process. Or you can really get that upgraded, what's called Premier and Unified Support through an EA. But that can also be done through CSP. It really kind of depends on how that's packaged together. The main reason we want to point this out is obviously there are benefits to being a CSP or an EA. You're going to get a higher level support. In the case of CSP, you're going to get value-added services where all of these are the same exact cost. You're not paying anything additional from one way or the other. But it's important to note that if you're kind of on pay-as-you-go right now, going from pay-as-you-go to a CSP is not a simple task. So if you wanted to take advantage of those value-add services, there is an actual migration involved. And the reason that we bring this up is we want to encourage people pursue that option now. We see a lot of customers are kind of pay-as-you-go. They're in like the $1,000, $2,000 spend range. That's nice and easy. That's a quick migration. But if you pay-as-you-go up into the $10,000 or $20,000 range, moving to CSP at that point is very, very, very difficult. Definitely requires kind of an investment on your end to make that move. So just something to bring up now if any of you guys are on pay-as-you-go, but it's really important to kind of consider, how am I buying my Azure? We ask that question to a lot of clients and not everybody knows the answer. So it's important to consider things like this. And then finally, like I said, of course, the plug at the end is really how ThreeCloud can help. Like I said, with Chris and Manny on the phone, they're just a couple members of our managed services team. We do this day in and day out. We do spend optimization. We own CSP relationships for clients. We provide kind of all up managed services from an operational perspective. We provide that extra Azure expertise from, monitoring or provisioning or kind of the advisory piece. If your organization doesn't have a ton of internal Azure expertise. ThreeCloud is an Azure expert MSP. We're one of the handful in the world on that, and we actually are the largest Azure only expert MSP in North America. And like I mentioned, we really do add on those tier 1 CSP value services. So you get those things at no additional cost. So really our goal is to make sure that on the financial operations front, you kind of have those pieces put into place that we talked about a little earlier, but also that we're maximizing your business value inside of Azure. There are things to get value out of Azure even outside of cost, kind of talking about, hey, what are the next steps in your journey? It is worth mentioning, kind of most importantly, that if you reach out to ThreeCloud, there's some contact information on the next slide, and mention this webinar. We are offering a free high-level spend assessment. So someone like Chris or Manny will dive into your environment and kind of look at some of the things that we talked about. Definitely something to contact us about after this if that's something you're interested in. But I did want to take a chance to thank everybody for attending here. Hope everyone enjoyed it. I do see one question that let me jump on really quick here. I may be misusing the tool here, but it just says or sponsorship of Microsoft. Carlos, if you want to resubmit that question, I apologize. It doesn't look like it came through entirely.
Chandler, I think Carlos did end up submitting it a second time, and I think I am seeing it there. And I think we had one other question as well. So it helps if you, I think, expand out the questions interface on our end. I'm realizing. So
you are correct. There you go. Nice. Okay, so yeah, Carlos asked, is it possible to use this tool with a certain account type as Patrocinio of Microsoft? I am not familiar with that. Is Chris or Manny, do you happen to know what Patrocinio is?
I haven't been made familiar specifically with that. I do see that it's, the clue there is, I guess, is some sort of a non-for-profit account type. And as far as I'm aware, I'll defer to Chris, as has probably some better expertise here. But as far as I'm aware, There is no account type distinction for at least the native Azure tooling. Ultimately, if you have an Azure subscription and you have the appropriate roles or permissions, you may have to work with your system administrator in Azure to make sure that you have the right permissions. But as long as you have an Azure subscription, you should be able to gain access to Azure Cost Management. The one caveat there is if you are being sold by a partner like a CSP provider, ThreeCloud is one. One of the things is you do have to request it one time for your tenant. So native Azure Cost Management by default is hidden to customers who are CSP partners. But as soon as you submit a request, your partner should be able to open that up to you and to anybody else who has appropriate permissions. It's not a kind of painstaking permission that you have to apply per person. It's just kind of like a one-time flag that you have, a one-time switch you have to flip. So that's it there. So Carlos, let us know if that helps. And Chris, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add there.
No, that was spot on, Manny.
Cool. Moving up to Alan Jones, who asked, is the data for the cost analysis in Azure accessible via Power Query? So Excel or Power BI could do standard reports that are easily accessible. Yeah, I know we do that a lot on the managed services side. We focus a lot on Power BI reporting or breaking. There's also some great dashboarding tools specifically in Azure to break that down. But yes, absolutely. Manny or Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but can definitely tie those type things into Power BI.
Yeah, there's a native Power BI connector. We can link it here afterwards, but it's a Microsoft native Power BI connector. If you have an EA, that's the best case scenario for it, but it has a bunch of canned reports, and obviously you can manipulate it any way that you choose. But yes, or just Google or Bing Azure Cost Management Power BI connector.
The only other thing I'll add there is that most of the reports that we showed you kind of in native Azure or even in a third-party tool like 3CMP, everything usually also has an export option. So if the question relates to like kind of Excel, absolutely, right? So even if you don't want to use an API or some sort of connector, you could just always export some of the reports that you're looking at and manipulate it in Excel if you like.
Great question. Real quick, wrapping up here, is it possible to use this tool in the government cloud? Yes, absolutely. We're happy to discuss that. We're happy to be able to help with the government cloud as well, Jeanette. And then finally, is there any way to combine subscriptions in the cost analysis, especially if those subscriptions are part of different enterprise agreements? I'll let Chris or Manny take that one as well.
Yeah, so this is, there does start becoming kind of devil in the details. So you will, let's say you were buying through a partner and you're using cost management because they've enabled it for you as a CSP customer, for example. You will, there's a limitation with cost management where, you would only view one subscription at a time. But that's, again, generally when you're working with a partner, you'd be curious to see what other tools they're leveraging as a part of their service, and hopefully you'll get a single pane of glass. So ThreeCloud does offer, for that very reason, the 3CMP tool to allow you to get a single pane of glass. Specifically with EA, it all, again, just comes down to sort of role-based access control, right? So again, Chris could probably elaborate on this a little better than I, but if you are part of a parent company that has an EA, well, something controls your permissions to your subscriptions. And even these third-party tools will be able to get granular to only look at certain subscriptions that may be a part of an EA.
Yeah, great question, Jeff. Great. Okay, I think we're right at time here. So yeah, thank you absolutely to everyone for coming. Again, my contact information is on here. I'll kind of run point if you have any questions that you want me to pass on to Manny, Chris, or team. But thank you everybody for coming. It was great to have you. Great to present on here. Would love to hear from some of you. Any feedback you have regarding kind of future webinars. 3Cloud does webinars like this all the time, usually kind of on the more technical aspects of Azure. So if you're doing cool stuff like data warehousing or app dev or whatever it may be, definitely keep an eye out for those. But I will turn it back over to Crystal if she's still around to just kind of wrap up here.
All right, thanks, Tim. I greatly appreciate it. And as you guys may know, or for those who are just now attending a new webinar, we will have the recording around 12 p.m. Eastern Standard tomorrow time in your email box. So just look out for that. And like Chairman said, we do webinars every Tuesday. So please follow us on social media at ThreeCloud or at Go ThreeCloud on Twitter and Facebook. And we list all of our webinars on our website. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much for attending. Chandler, everybody, thank you so much for hosting. Have a good day.